we're going to jump into the topic today. Kind of align with the Women's Assembly. We've been talking a lot about this live event and prepping for this event coming up in September. And so one of the things we started thinking about is overall theme and objectives and mission, and what is it we want from people, for people to get out of this event. And so as we were talking through that, you got to come up with this tagline. We do this for every muster where there's a tagline, something that's anchoring us to what's the overall mission. And even if it's not an overt explanation, there's subtle ways in which we use those taglines. And every muster, every year, I guess, that muster, we have some different taglines we've used. So for this event, I've been thinking really a lot about what is it that I want for this first inaugural women's event that we're doing, which is very exciting for me. And as we were going back and forth, and I was talking with my colleague and my dear friend, Jen Tarantino, who's on with us today, we started talking about this tagline, and what came of it was this tagline of own it all. So when we had a switch in the schedule and I had to step in to present today, I thought, you know what, that's what I'm going to talk about today, this idea of own it all, and what I've been thinking about as it relates to women in leadership, whether this is leadership at home or in business or both. So what really made me think about this idea of own it all was this question we have all heard for the history of time is, can women have it all? Everyone here has heard that question at some point in time. Can women have it all? And it's been a big topic of debate. And what I love is that all people have these very intense perspectives on this question of, can women have it all? And in fact, I did just a fun little Google search because I thought, what's out there now? It's been a little while since I've given this any mind, but let me see what's out there. And I typed in that question, can women have it all? And here are the top searches that came up for me. Executive women and the myth of having it all. Why women still can't have it all? What does it actually mean for women to have it all? How are we still having the can women do both conversation? Can women have it all? More than ever. She famously said that women can't have it all. We are still asking if women can have it all. These are all very new, fresh articles, fresh debates, fresh opinions on this idea and this question of, can women have it all? And I'm not here to argue that question, whether or not that question is real or true. In my opinion, there's one answer, and that's absolutely yes. And that all comes down to what we do and how we act and what we actually look for. So can a woman have a family and a successful successful career? Sorry. Can women stay home and be content and valued in that and feel good about that decision and not feel the pressure to go work outside of the home? Can women choose to not have kids and still be happy and live a fulfilled life and not feel as if they're missing something or feel the burden of the society norms around them? Can women have successful careers without damaging their children or damaging their marital relationships? Can we have it all? And as I've thought more about this question, which obviously is still a question that is being asked by men and women alike across the board with strong opinions on both sides, the answer for me is absolutely yes. Women can have it all. But if you want to have it all, you've got to own it all. And that's where this own it all really comes from. And when I think about this idea of what does it mean to own it all, the first thing we have to stop doing is making excuses. And listen, this is not a trait specific to women. This is a trait specific to humans. We are not born with this instinct to take ownership. We are not. You think about little kids when they're growing up, that's not something that's innate in them to step up and say, oh, that's my fault. If anything, we are born with the opposite. We are born to protect ourselves. We are born to put up these walls. We are born to push blame and push problems off to other people, because that gives us this false sense of security that, hey, okay, we're over in our little bucket and we can just sit over here and survive. So the first thing we have to do is we actually have to stop making those excuses. We have to stop making excuses, stop casting blame to other people, stop giving up all the control in our life to actually solve the problems and challenges that we're facing. And to do that, we have to start transitioning out of our comfort zone into this mindset of ownership, where we start to recognize that every single thing that we are facing, every challenge, every difficulty, every problem is up to us to solve. I've had some really interesting conversations lately because there's a lot of opinions around the word fault. And I use that a lot in the way that I talk about ownership. I use this question of how can I make this my fault? These problems and challenges, they're my fault. And I use that a lot. And I recognize through these conversations that that language doesn't always translate as well to other people, because that word fault can carry a lot of guilt or shame or challenges in how people perceive the situation that they're dealing with. And so I want to make it clear, I use that a lot, but what I'm really talking about when I say, how can I make this my fault? Hey, this was my fault, I need to make a change here, is I'm talking about ownership. So if that word fault bothers you for whatever reason, I don't ever want that to be a stopgap for understanding the true content of what we're talking about. And I think that even pushes us more into this theme of own it all. I'm not talking about saying, hey, all these problems or these things that have happened to me or these times in which I was truly a victim, that I'm not saying that those are your fault and I want you to put the shame and the guilt on your shoulders. But what I am saying is that we all have the power and the control to step up and take ownership. So I want to settle that because that's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm getting better at not using that language if that's going to end up being a stopgap for people in understanding what I'm talking about. But at the same point, if I do say it, please understand what I'm talking about here is ownership, recognizing ownership across all levels and every challenge. So if we want to have it all, we have to own it all. So what does that look like? We have to first own our relationships. We have to own prioritizing and maintaining the relationships around us, the relationships that are going to help us and solve the problems that we're trying to face. That's relationships with our kids. We have to own relationships with our spouse. We have to own the relationships with our friends. We have to own relationships at work with our colleagues, our subordinates, and our leadership. We have to own how we communicate. We have to own our tact, our tone, our delivery. How are we communicating? If we are not being effective, we have to take ownership of that and we have to make adjustments. And sometimes that means we have to subordinate our ego in order to make the right adjustments. Sometimes that means we have to take ownership in recognizing who we're communicating with and adjusting our communication style accordingly. We have to own our to-do lists. And we have to own our priorities. We have to own the overwhelming plates of responsibility that we feel and we are carrying at any given time. We have to take ownership of that. Those priorities, that to-do list isn't going to do itself. So we have to step up and take ownership of that. And to do that, we have to own our emotions. We have to own our ability to detach and learn how to recognize those red flags that cause us to spin off and say things or do things that we didn't intend to, fueled by that emotion. I'm not saying to be unemotional. And this has been a really interesting topic of conversation as well, because there's a lot of people that feel, and I agree with them, that our emotions sometimes help us recognize that this is something of importance or a priority and can give us that indication that, hey, I need to focus some effort here. And I agree with that. But we have to take ownership of recognizing that while our emotions might give us some insight on what might be of importance and where to turn our attention, our emotions don't help us generally make sound and calm and good decisions. So we have to own stepping back and detaching from those emotions, practicing that detachment so we can be ready to see the truth of what's going on. That's how we own the to-do list. That's how we own our priorities. We own our emotions and we own our ability to step back from those emotions so that we can see what needs to get done and then go and execute. We have to own the mission. We have to own and understand what that mission is and where are we trying to go? What are we trying to do? What is the end state and the goal? That's up to us to understand. In some cases in our lives, in some aspects, it's up to us to actually determine what that mission is. In other capacities in our life, there's a mission that's been stated for us and we are contributing to that broader mission. And so we have to take ownership of understanding how we actually contribute to that mission in a meaningful and sincere way. We have to own how we empower others. How are we encouraging and building up our kids and passing off things and implementing this idea of decentralized command and helping them to step up and lead? How are we owning and taking ownership of empowering our team to step up and lead and the people that we work with? How are we empowering our leadership to contribute to the mission and accomplish that mission. There's all these things that we have to own as it relates to empowering the people around us, which is the ultimate goal of being a leader. We have to own our problems. We have to own our challenges. And more than that, we have to recognize that all of these things are within our control to determine the outcome. And that's where we have to take ownership of the solutions. We have to take ownership of how we respond. We have to take ownership of our ability, once again, to detach so that we can see what needs to take place and go and execute on those things. We have to do that. It's up to us. No one else is going to do that for us. No one's going to solve our problems. No one's going to solve our challenges. We have to take ownership of what we do next and how we move forward in mitigating and overcoming those challenges. We have to own the home front with our family, with our kids, with our spouse, with our friends, with our community. We have to own the boardroom. We have to own our work life, our professional world, the things that we're doing there and how we're contributing to the mission, how we're building those relationships within our teams. And ultimately, we have to own our story. And this is where I really think this women's assembly comes to the forefront. We have to take ownership of our story. When I was looking at all these online articles around this question, can women have it all? I was so amazed at the opinions across the board of all these people coming to the forefront saying, well, they can, but, or they can't because of this. And here's the stats, and this says that. And I kept reading this and I thought, man, none of you, to include the women that are contributing, which by the way, most of these articles are not from that perspective, from a woman's perspective. They're coming from the broader perspective, which is very heavily influenced by the male perspective on this. But when I look at these articles, there's these heavy opinions on this question, can women have it all? And the only person individually that can determine that question for you is you. We have to get out of our own way. We have to stop making those excuses. We have to take back the ownership of our story. We have to take ownership of how our story ends. We have to take ownership of what people will someday say about us, about our journey and what we contributed and how we lived our life and how we led the people around us. So in that light, I want to share a story with you. At Echelon Front, we do these events called the Battlefield Review. We go out to Gettysburg and we do a 2-day staff ride where we go through the different stands and we kind of walk through in sequence the historical battle sites and the things that happened in that 3-day span in Gettysburg and the decisions that were made. And we talk a lot about the leadership and the different decisions that happened and the outcome and how that potentially shifted the outcome of that particular battle. Many people are familiar with Gettysburg. It is extremely hallowed ground. It's an incredible experience, but the entire time we're really focused on that combat leadership component and then how it applies to our life. But the last 2 times, something has always stood out to me. There's always been this one little piece, and it's right at the end. So we go through this whole 2 days experience, and right before we go to the final cemetery where Jocko reads the Gettysburg Address. And if anyone here has heard Jocko, you can imagine that that is a pretty incredible experience to have him read that there in that hallowed ground. But right before we get there, the bus takes this little pivot and just pulls off to the side of the road. And it's just a moment. It's literally a 2-minute story in the midst of 2.5 days of a lot of content and historical data. And the bus driver every time will point out this singular statue. And it's a woman. And she's wiping her brow and she's pregnant. And he'll tell this little story about this woman named Elizabeth Thorne. And Elizabeth was married to a local cemetery caretaker who then her husband was sent off to go fight in this war. And so she was kind of left to manage their kids. She was pregnant with I think it was 6. And don't quote my historical accuracy here. I'm just high level giving you the details. I will go back and really dive into this. But I wanted to share the story because she had young kids. She was pregnant. Her husband's off at war. And during the 3-day span, you have to imagine they opened up their home for the Union to come and stay, and they ravished their farms. They ate up everything that they had. They stayed in their land. Her home was situated in epicenter of this incredible battle. Jocko reads this thing, and I'll have to find out where it was and maybe send it to you guys, but there's an account that somebody gives after the war. So after everything happened and the armies moved on, the devastation that was left in Gettysburg is unbelievable. Hundreds of thousands of people, lying dead on the ground there. And what happened in that town and their ability to come back together and try to piece it together was just an incredible story in and of itself. But for Elizabeth Thorne, this was very special because I hear this little story, and all they say about her when we stop the bus is they point out the statue and they say, hey, she's considered one of the heroes of the war because she was known for, at 7 months pregnant, by herself, burying over 100 men and marking their graves properly in her front yard, and then continued to build out her farm and rebuild that area and re-get their house together while her husband was off and manage this whole crazy scenario. I want to just read a couple stats here. So after the battle, many of the bodies were buried in shallow graves on the cemetery grounds, including the Thornes garden. Elizabeth took it upon herself to bury over 100 men and then mark the graves with makeshift headstones, 7 months pregnant, mind you. Elizabeth also played a key role in convincing her husband to stay in Gettysburg and continue caring for the cemetery, which had been badly damaged during the battle. In recognition of her bravery and dedication, Elizabeth Thorne was later appointed as the official caretaker of the cemetery, becoming the first woman to hold the position. She continued to care for the cemetery for many years, even after her husband's death. She is remembered as a hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. And we stop and hear this little story of this woman. And every time they tell this little story, and it's, again, we don't even get out. We just pull over to the side. And here's this woman in the statue, and she's wiping her brow. And you have to imagine it's in the dead of summer, and these bodies are bloated. And I'm just imagining what this could have been for her. And I look at that statue, and I know her. I know that woman. I didn't have to deal with what she had to deal with, but I know the women who sat on the home front and had to manage it all while their husbands were out. And I've met women who have that same level of perseverance and strength and ability to just take the bad situation and make it something amazing. I know her, and I think a lot of you know her. You recognized her and you recognize the challenges that she was dealing with. And you feel a sense of camaraderie with this woman that I want to go. I feel like she'd be someone I'd love to go sit down and have dinner with, right? Like, I just want to meet her. I want to know her. I want to talk to her because there's a part of her that I recognize as someone that I want to be. I want to be better at just recognizing what needs to get done and not making any excuses and just getting the work done. And that's what she did. She looked out after this horrific war, after her town had been demolished, her husband gone, her kids at home, pregnant with her, I think, 6th child. And she looked outside and she saw what needed to be done. And she got to work. She got to work. She didn't make any excuses. She didn't cast any blame. She didn't put her hands up. She didn't rely on the help of others. She said, nope, this is something I can do. I am capable. And that, to me, is what this whole theme is around. We can have it all, whatever that means for us. And for each of us, that's different. What we want and the things that we need that cultivate that all is different for each of us. But we can absolutely achieve that. We can have everything that we want. In order to do that, though, we have to take ownership of it all. We have to own it all. And we have to own our story. We have to look out and see the work that needs to be done and then go get to work and get it done. So I just wanted to share that story. I think, she took ownership for sure of her story. And it's amazing that in such a historic event, there's one lonely little statue of this badass, strong woman that I can look up to as an example to me of what it means to own it all. So I wanted to share that message with you guys today. And with that, Corey, any thoughts?
I love the story, Jamie, and I love everything you're talking about. I'm super excited to see how we can expand on this theme at the assembly live in September. So that's going to be really cool. I think it resonates with women, especially because I think a lot of us feel like that is our lot in life, is to make things happen for our family, at work. Like a lot of us feel that way, and it can be overwhelming. It can be frustrating. It can be exhausting. But at the end of the day, it's also really freeing because it means that we get the opportunity to make things happen and to seize opportunities and face challenges and help the people we care about the most navigate those things because we choose to own it all. So I love the message today.